Have you ever been told that spirituality is not scientific? And have you ever wondered what makes spiritual science a science? I've had my own journey to figure out 4 characteristics that I believe qualify spirituality as a science. I've combined what I learned from taking a Ph.D. with the work of the Danish author Martinus, who writes about spiritual science and what the science in it is. This video provides you with 4 characteristics that I believe make spiritual science a science. I'm not claiming my 4 characteristics is a complete list, but it is good as an inspiration for thinking about what makes spiritual science a science. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts on this, and subscribe to the channel if you want to know more about spiritual science in general. Before we get into the 4 characteristics of spiritual science, we need to drill a bit on what spiritual science is in the first place. Spiritual science extends beyond materialistic science by taking a spiritual world into account. There is something behind the matter. This something provides meaning to the matter. This meaning comes from living beings. And living beings have intention and express themselves via the matter that we perceive. Spirituality seeks a deeper meaning of life by investigating the principles and the meaning behind the matter. It does this by claiming that the matter is an expression of life. Not just humans and animals, but all matter that we experience. The spiritual science is about finding out what the meaning behind the matter is. Furthermore, it's also about finding the principles that this meaning is based on. This meaning is not possible to quantify in terms of weight and numbers. It is like letters in the alphabet. Measuring the lines in characters and words does not provide us with the meaning of the words and the sentences. We need to understand the meaning and the intention behind the words. This is something more to the letters and words than the physical presence of the letters and the words. The idea is the same for the world and matter. There's a meaning behind the matter that we experience beyond the physical experience. We need to understand the life expressions that we are dealing with. Spiritual science is a handbook for understanding these life expressions. But what will it take to make spirituality a science? Let's get into the 4 characteristics of 4. To take any world picture seriously as a science, being a spiritual or materialistic, there has to be a definition of it. There has to be a well-defined terminology. We need clear definition to be able to understand the world picture. Without clear definitions, it becomes very hard to assess the world picture because it's unclear what it really is. These definitions should ideally not change over time. Changing definitions makes it hard to work with the world picture because you have to keep in mind what version of the world picture you're working with. This doesn't necessarily invalidate the world picture. That being said, the underlying world picture should not change due to imprecise definitions. We also need to look into how coherent the world picture is. That means the different aspects of the world picture have to fit well together. We cannot have water to run downward at some point and upwards at another one. The world picture should not contradict itself. Things have to fit together. And if they don't, then there should be an explanation for it, which means there is no contradiction after all. The first characteristic provides us with a well-defined and coherent world picture. But that doesn't make it a science, because it's still only an assertion. So let's look into what can make a world picture more than an assertion. Explanations. From characteristic number 1, we have a well-described world picture. But how do we start to trust it? How does it become plausible in a scientific way? The 3 next points are all about making spiritual science plausible and thereby scientific. First thing we need is explanations. The world picture has to be explained. We need explanations about how things relate to each other and how their structure is. This enables us to check the world picture with our intelligence. We can go over the world picture and think it through ourselves. If we cannot do that, the world picture will only be an assertion to us. That is something we either have to believe in or have as an assumption. It cannot be real knowledge to us as long as it's only assertions or assumptions. An example I often use is Martinus' analysis of the living being. Martinus states that the living being has three principles that together are the living being. It is the I, as in I do something, the ability to create, and the matter. These three principles are definitions in the world picture, and together they make up the living being. These definitions meet the characteristic number 1, which is clear definitions. But there's no way we can validate them without explanations. Martinus provides these explanations. He does this by describing in depth how these three principles of the living being function together. This enables us to ask questions about the world picture and find answers. By asking questions and finding answers, the world picture becomes more plausible and more scientific to us. With explanation, we go beyond assertions. It is not just a description of how it is, but we're able to go into details and get our questions answered. This is how we can check the world picture with our intelligence. This is how it starts to make sense to us at a higher level than just believing in it. Ideally, we should get answers to all our questions. Sometimes we can ask questions that the specific world picture does not answer. Materialistic science won't answer your questions about the meaning of life. And the spiritual science usually won't answer how the materialistic part of the world is functioning. It is up to each one of us to judge whether we can still trust a world picture if we cannot get all our questions answered. Unanswered questions do not necessarily make a world picture untrue, because it could just be an undescribed area in the world picture. However, it can make it harder to accept the world picture. The third characteristic is whether the world picture is in accordance with our daily experiences. Is the world view plausible to us based on how we experience the world? This might sound subjective, and it is in a way. We all have experiences with us from this life, and from a spiritual point of view, we also bring experiences from earlier life in the form of talents. More about that in another video. This experience is our knowledge. This knowledge determines what we can experience and thereby what we find plausible. We can have experiences that makes us very materialistic, or we can have experiences that makes us more spiritual. So what we find plausible is depending on our prior experience. In that way, our worldview is relative to us. We can call worldview subjective because they're depending on each living being's experience and knowledge. A worldview can be naive to us if it lacks significant knowledge that we have ourselves, if our knowledge is beyond the world picture. For instance, if we know about astronomy, then it becomes hard to believe that the earth is flat or there's a God somewhere in the sky. These two examples of worldviews are naive to the astronomer, who knows the earth is round and there is no physical space for a God in the sky. On the other hand, there can also be worldviews that has knowledge which is beyond our own knowledge. Such worldview will be like a fantasy, something utopian or unrealistic to us. It is something that we cannot believe or find plausible in any way. It's not that the worldview is wrong, it's just that it doesn't fit into the knowledge that we have, and thereby it's rejected as irrelevant to us. A world picture has to fit our own experience to make it plausible to us. This doesn't say anything about to what extent the world picture is true in absolute terms. It only states to what extent a person can accept it or not. But if the world picture is within what a person can accept as plausible, then the next step kicks in. It is a critical investigation into whether our own experience are in accordance with the world picture. And this includes all experiences, because we are talking about world pictures, which by definition is about everything. So this is just not a lab exercise unless you think about the whole life as a lab. We learn from life, and life shows us what is right and wrong. We can participate in this learning experience by applying a theoretical world picture to the world and thereby understand our own experiences in a different way. It becomes a back and forth between theory and practice. And this includes all experiences, because we are talking about a world picture which by definition is about everything. So this is not a lab exercise. We learn from life, and life shows us what is right and wrong. We can participate in this learning experience by applying a theoretical world picture to the world and thereby understand our own experiences in a different way. It becomes a back and forth between theory and practice. Practice here being the experience of life. So the world picture needs to be in accordance with our experiences, no matter where these experiences come from. But how can we assure that the world picture is correct, that it cannot be in a better version than the one we have? That is the last point and last characteristic. The last characteristic is that the world picture can be in no other way. It essentially means that you have a logical, plausible world picture that resonates with your experiences. After that, you need to ensure that it can be in no other way. We see this type of thinking within mathematics and how things are mathematically proved. You show that 2 + 2 is 4, and it can be in no other way. It is a similar approach you need in spiritual science. An example is Martinus, who has his analysis of the living being that consists of the 3 principles I talked about earlier. The idea is that if you leave out one of the 3 principles, then you don't have a living being. And we know we have living beings, so the 3 principle must exist. So essentially what he is saying is that we have these 3 principles that makes up the living beings: the I, the ability to create, and the matter. And essentially, if you don't have an I, which is sort of the director of the living being, you have an ability to create and matter, but you don't have anything to actually change anything. You don't have something that can use the ability to create or to change the matter. The same goes if you don't have the ability to create. Then you have an I and you have matter, but you don't have an ability to actually change the matter. So everything becomes silence and nothing can happen, right? Nothing can change. And the third option is that if you have the I and the ability to create, but you don't have matter, then you have something that can actually direct the ability to create, but you don't have anything to change. So that is the very short version of the analysis of the living being and why these 3 principles need to be there. It can't be in no other way. This type of thinking should be applied to the world picture. Martinus uses this type of argument throughout his work. A typical one that is, if A is not the case, then there would be nothing. We know there's something, so A has to be true. We need this type of argument to ensure things could not be in a different way. This should not stop us from thinking critically and reflecting on things. But if we don't ensure that there are no alternatives, then we cannot be sure that we have an absolute truth. We could have something that could be different. We want to make sure we got the truth, and alternative explanations are explicitly explained to be untrue. Materialistic science cannot do this because it deducts its results from data that is only based on a part of the world. So there's always a possibility that the next data point is something unexpected. Spiritual science goes beyond the materialistic method. It leaves out a lot of details, if not all of them, and looks at the world in a way more abstract way. Thus, it can provide a general description of everything. So you might ask, if all the details are gone, can you still describe and explain anything? And yes, it's still possible to give characteristics of these abstractions that are meaningful and have consequences for us. They are, in other words, relevant. And they can be checked as general facts, as the analysis of the living being showed. In other words, it is, to the best of my knowledge, possible to give general statements about the world and prove these statements cannot be any different. Of course, there are assumptions you have to buy into. The three principles of the living being, with the clear definition, explanation, and your own experience, determines to what extent you can accept the assumptions. The assumptions in a world picture can be well defined, they can be well explained, and they can be in accordance with your daily experience, so they are not assumptions anymore. Over time, more and more can get turned from assumptions or beliefs into something that are more solid and science-like. The four characteristics might be controversial from a philosophical point of view, but that doesn't make them wrong, or right for that matter. The assertion here has to stand on their own independently of what our current science states. Leave a comment below if you have something to add, questions about the four characteristics. So before we end the video, I will just sum up what we have talked about. The first characteristic is that we need a coherent and well-defined world picture. That world picture needs explanation. The third characteristic is that the world picture has to be in accordance with our own knowledge. And the fourth characteristic is that it cannot be in other ways. These four characteristics might not be exclusive, but they're kind of harsh. So if we meet these four characteristics, then we are, in my humble opinion, better off than most of today's science. So I think spirituality can be thought of as scientific. Not all spirituality is scientific, but it can be. And why should it not be able to be scientific? Meaning and the mental part of us is something that exists, something that is real. So why should we not be able to describe and research this area as we can with the matter in the world? Methods and research approaches might have to be different, and the way we check the science might be different as well. But why shouldn't we be able to get facts and the truth about these areas as well? That might sound a bit rhetorical, so if you have any comments, just leave them below and I'll be happy to answer. I hope this video has inspired you to think about what spiritual science is or could be. I'll come back to these aspects in future videos and provide more examples and in-depth about them. Give the channel a subscription if you want to join that journey. Thanks for watching and see you next time.